I keep mentioning my long format recordings, but I don't usually share them because they're class material and they're aimed at people actively enrolled in classes. So I don't usually share them publicly. But I thought today might be nice to actually look at one of them. This is actually the first time I'm showing you my mystery Jacobean this year as well. For the last few years, I've been doing a mystery class. I give you the absolute bare bones of what subject is going to be and show you nothing else. And it's kind of a great big embroidery leap of faith. This year we have been working this Jacobean design. It's worked in blues and golds. It's got a green accent colour. I've been sitting on this design for a few years and I'm really, really pleased with how it's going. So you can see that the laidwork has already been worked in this large central area. Laidwork is a series of long stitches worked across the surface of the work. On the reverse, the stitch is shorter, so it conserves wool, but that also means these long stitches are really difficult to tension. So holding stitches have to be worked on top. There has got to be a secondary holding stitch for all laidwork. It is a fundamental principle. We cannot deviate from this. What we decide to use as a secondary holding stitch is personal preference. So on this recording, I decided that I wanted to work a series of vines across this area. And the vines are just worked with stem stitch. So it's actually fairly straightforward. And then I have added in a few more lazy daisies, which we will see. So I've got all of my threads on surface and my scissors I have cast on in an area that is going to be hidden. And I have just started to eyeball my way up the area. So you can see I'm using my scissors here to indicate a rough idea of where this outline is going to run to. I have taken off the original commentary. This is a shiny new commentary just for social media because, you know, it's a free update. It is not class material. So stem stitch is being worked on the way up there. It has been started in this nice medium blue. If you've been keeping up with the Essential Embroidery Stitch Society, you will have seen that we have looked at stem stitch before. Stem stitch is worked with a forward stitch. Mine are usually between 3 and 4 millimeters in length. We then leave a loop to one side of the stitch so we can bring our needle up from underneath, and we then pull that loop through. I really have eyeballed where I'm traveling here. The aim is to make sure that every one of my long stitches is being supported by a secondary stitch that sits on the surface. Sometimes when I'm doing these secondary holding stitches, I try and bring my needle up through the existing laidwork. So I'm trying to pierce my threads. I often find that helps me pin those long stitches down where I want them to lay. But sometimes I naturally find that my needle slides down between stitches or comes up between stitches, and I don't mind that either. So long as enough secondary stitching is being used across the entire area to pin down the long laid stitches, I honestly don't mind where my needle comes up or goes down. I've gently created a sweep running through this area. I'm just going to give it a little bit more of a turn around this top section here, and at the end of the stem stitch I can either park this thread or I can work another row. It's personal choice. I have drawn all of these lines out for myself to start with because that makes my life a lot easier. I'm not completely winging this. I am just kind of eyeballing from a drawing that is not in shot. So here's a secondary line of stem stitch. You can see the first stitch, there's a loop, and then I'm coming up in the center and I'm pulling through. Stem stitch is just one of those lovely fundamental stitches that is useful for almost all outlines. In the long term, in this design, there will be an outline around my laid work. I like my laid work to have a solid outline worked around it to neaten up the edge, but I will make the choice as to what colour that is and what stitch I use later down the line. So far, it is a mystery what I've decided to do, because part of the mystery Jacobean class that I'm doing is for my own enjoyment. I get to make up each month exactly where I'm going. There has been a colour drawing created for this. There is a stitch plan, but some of those smaller fine details, I am making them up as I go along. So it gives me the freedom to balance the design overall. And you can see this outline is coming into this main stem so that it joins up. So this should look like a series of vines all growing out from my main trunk. For ease, while I've been recording this, I've just parked that thread off to one side. I need to tie it off on the reverse at some point. I say at some point because I filmed this several weeks ago and I've still not tied back these ends. So that is a job for future Jen when she comes to pick this frame up again and film the next instalment of the Mystery Jacobean. So I've picked up a different shade here. I always believe that if there is room in a design for shading, there should be shading. I'm a big believer that if there's space, if there's room in a stitch for more than one colour to be used, always use more than one colour. It looks like you've put so much more time and effort into your work if you are shading through all of your stitches. If you just stick to the one thread, you can fill an area with a stitch and it will be fine. Will it be as engaging as if we filled it with a fully shaded area? So I like to make sure that I have lots of shading in every area. You can see here at the moment that whole trunk has been shaded. I think the bottom of the stem has fallen out of view, but that has been shaded. And my trellises are waiting for me to come in and infill because they too will be shaded. That is not what the next thing on my list is for my students. Next up, we're doing raised chain and raised stem. So you can see the stem stitch builds in quite quickly. It's not a long-winded stitch. Once you get into a flow with stem stitch, it builds up at a good pace. And my goal across the whole area is to make sure that all of my laid work is being held. I don't want any lengths of laid work to potentially move in the long term. So you can see I'm just preparing another thread. Again, I've not cast these on. They're being started at the side with a long tail because I can thread that tail through the reverse of my stitches in the long term. Again, future Jen needs to deal with lazy past Jen's mistakes. I've aimed to keep my paler stitches on the left hand side. I've got my darker stitches coming in on the right hand side just to create a little bit of a sweep in my shading. And I'm just trying to make sure that these rows of stem stitch, they just nestle into each other as they come into the end. Time for some of my darker threads coming in on the right hand side. I've got room here to cast on actually in an area that's being covered. So I've just taken my knot down on the surface of the fabric in an area that's being covered, and I'm just working 2 or 3 little back stitches. It's really important that these stitches are back stitches because they need to hold themselves when the knot is chopped away. I'm testing that that knot pulls. If it slips, if the thread pulls backwards, I know I don't have enough holding stitches in. If it stays true, if it doesn't shift when I give it some tension, then I know I can chop that knot away, which is what I did. And back onto my stem stitch. I know that my stem stitches, I find that mine are naturally slightly longer than others. It's the length that works for me. You will find that when you are learning your different stitches, you will find your own rhythm for every stitch. I know that for me, stem stitch tends to be a stitch that I make that little bit longer because I get a better flow. At this point, when I was stitching, I did think to myself, have I made a mistake? Does this look a little brain-like? It does come back. It does look good in the end, but I remember thinking at this point, have I done something weird? So if you think right now she's done something weird, I promise you it gets better. You will notice that as I've been working along, the threads that have been on the surface of the work, they've slowly, one by one, they've been removed from the view. One of my own shorthands, you'll find every tutor has got their own little shorthands. One of my shorthands is the threads that I know I'm going to use are on the surface of the work. The threads that I've finished using, I take off the surface of the work. I still have them within arm's reach if I want them again, but I've worked through my sequence. I've taken them off the surface of the work, so I know I don't desperately need them immediately. So that is just one of my own little shorthands. I prefer to have a clean frame. When I'm working, I try and minimize what I keep on the surface. So what is on the surface, it's there for a reason. It's there because I know I want to use it. As soon as I'm done with it, off it goes. It moves back to the general pile of stitches. Stitches, threads. And you can see this final dark vine is just working its way up. I've definitely used more of the medium and lighter tones in my blue wool than my dark on these vines because I want it to feel bright and airy. I don't want it to get too heavy. It is an overlaying area. In theory, if we're thinking in terms of perspective, it should be lighter. Just extending that little end down there so it made the shape I wanted. So at this point, I've got all of my vines in. I'm just giving them a little tweak. I'm just running my needle over my Laidwork to check that my threads feel secure. They did. They didn't move. They didn't ripple. And so I've brought in my green threads. Now this is my accent colour. When we are working a piece of Jacobean traditionally, we tend to have two main families. That's a range of colour that tracks through from light to dark. Often we try and pair those light to dark in both the main ranges. So the lights have the same depth of tone and the darks have the same depth of tone because that means they can shade through nicely. And we also want an accent colour. That is a colour that can be used sparingly for highlights. Mine in this design is this bright green range. It's my favourite range for Appletons. And I'm just forming little detached chain stitches randomly so they are growing off of my vine. You can see I didn't cast this thread on. It's another one of those I've got to fix it later threads. So I'm bringing my needle up where I want the little leaf to sit. I'm going back down, forming a loop, bringing my needle up through that loop and putting a little holding stitch there to keep it laying on the surface of the work. So it's a detached chain, it's a lazy daisy. It's however you want to think of it. Both of those are correct terms. And I have not planned where these little leaves go. I have put these in as and when I fancied putting them in. I put a few into the first vine. I then looked to see how they were laying on the surface. Were there room for more vines? If there were, great, let's get more vines in. If not, then I've moved on to a new area to put these little viney leaves into. And I've put them there really just to further decorate the area, just to make it look prettier. Any stitching can come over Laidwork. Particular favourites of mine are trellises. I really love feather stitch over Laidwork. I just think a freestyle feather that varies in size, I think it's very, very pretty. Chain stitch works, couch lines work. It's anything that sits over the surface can work functionally. It just needs to be holding all of our stitches in position. I started with my darker green, and you can already see it's not on the slate frame because I move my threads away when I'm done with them. I'm not too worried about how I'm carrying my thread across the reverse of the work. There are times that I'm crisscrossing back and forth, but I'm not putting an excessive number of stitches across the width. You can see that I've predominantly worked from the middle to the right, putting those little detached chains on, and I'm now working from the middle to the left. And wherever possible, these little detached chains, I am working them so that the angle of the chain is running slightly differently to the angle of the Laidwork, because what I don't want to have happen is my little detached chain stitches fall into the Laidwork and get lost. I don't tend to rush stages like this because every stitch is going to change the view that I've got of the work. So I need to put in a stitch and assess how I feel about it. Do I feel I need more? And do I need any in a specific area or not? So I don't tend to rush this stage. I work relatively slowly, and I just pause and look at the work before I decide where the next little detached chain is going. There is not a set number that I'm trying to include. It's what I like the look of. So I've just pulled that thread up. That will get cast back into the reverse of the stitches later on. You'll notice that when I have pulled up the thread within the design, it is on one of my paint lines. I have not pulled up that thread in the background because I do not want to run the risk of leaving marks in my background. So keep that in mind. The areas are starting to feel a little bit congested, so there are probably not going to be as many pale stitches dotted through. But I do like the contrast of both greens with the blue and the yellow. It's something I enjoy, mixing all of the colours in a Jacobean piece in one area. It's a great way of getting the shading to look like it's all harmoniously planned. Not that you've randomly sort of had a go and seen what happens. I in no way do that ever. I don't wing it. All planned out very carefully. Don't think I fit too many more stitches in at this point. As I mentioned, the next stitches that I'll be covering in this design will be the raised stem and the raised chain. I'm trying to make sure that, much like the Essential Embroidery Stitch Society, my Jacobean pieces cover all of the fundamentals. So I always have a shopping list of what I look to include. I always start with my trellises and then I start bulking in things like trunks and stems, my burden stitches, my laid work. I always wait to do my long and short until I'm a little bit further into a design so that there's a bit of stitching into the work before we have to go to things like the long and short. So these are all stitches that are waiting to get built in. This is a self-paced class. If anyone is seeing this design and they're thinking, oh, I like the look of that, I might fancy joining. All of the details for this class are on Thinkific. It is possible to jump in. The video recordings are already updated for the first 4 months of the year. We have one class a month, one sort of session a month with all of the different stitches uploaded. But all of these longer format recordings that I create for classes, I don't tend to cut them down if I can avoid it. I will always try and make sure that they're as long and as detailed as possible, because that is the best way of learning stitches, is to actually see them done in real time. Every now and then I put a detached chain that's touching a detached chain at the base, just so it looks like two leaves that are growing from a similar point. You can be really creative with stitches like this and areas like this. You can make them really playful. But I was really, really pleased with how this section came out. I thought it looked really, really pretty. You can see I'm procrastinating. Is there going to be another one? There is. This is why I take my time. I'm thinking all the time, do I want another, or is that enough? And I believe that this is enough. So that was me filming how to put holding stitches onto Laidwork. I was really pleased with these results. At some point later in the year, I'm sure I'm going to show you this finished, but not quite yet.